Hello, everyone. Jim does such a spectacular job of lowering expectations. It's really, he's already told me that I'm going to owe him for life for winning the lottery and being able to interview two spectacular leaders, policymakers, and incredible women role models. I have to just say that to get going. So we're going to talk, the title of our session is Lessons from Abroad, Bold Strategies for Kids' Online Safety. And we are certainly going to talk about kids' online safety and strategies from abroad. But I hope we will also broaden the conversation to talk about the differences between technology in Europe and the rest of the world and tech here, and are there possibilities for a broader tech coalition, and then just maybe even talk a little more about how and whether you can use kids and families, both of which you have a lot of experience with, maybe to build coalitions even beyond technology. So that's the game plan, and I am going to dispense with titles, so I've asked permission, so I'm going to ask Margrethe to start. And again, I'm not going to introduce either Margrethe or Hillary, but just to say that you were the EU Commissioner for Competition Policy for 5 years, and then afterwards the Vice President for the European Commission, Europe Fit for a Digital Future. And from where I sit, I think you had more influence on European digital regulation than pretty much anyone. You were a big part of the European Digital Safety Act. So before we do anything, I'd love for you just to talk a little bit about what the protections for kids are there so that we can sort of establish a policy baseline. And Hillary, I'll ask you the same thing about the New York legislation, and we'll go from there.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you for having me. So a foreigner in this country. So the starting...
And we're off to the races.
Yeah. No, so the starting point obviously is the same as has been, the main thread of all discussions here today. Kids are kids. They are human beings who are developing, their brains are developing. And we tried, all the soft cooperation measures that you can possibly imagine. Codes of conduct, strengthened codes of conduct, coming back and forth. We tried everything before we entered into thinking we cannot prevent our kids from being preyed upon without legislation. So if you are sufficiently big in Europe, and that means that you're Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, whatever, well, you have to do a risk assessment. Can my services be dangerous to use? For mental health, for instance. If that is the case, I have to mitigate those risks in order to be able to launch my product, which has already meant that TikTok has not launched new products in Europe because they could not prove that they were not addictive in their designs. And I think that is an amazing, important step that we will not tolerate the addictive designs on our kids. And the second thing, that we need to have age verification. What I have heard during the day is that kids at 8, at 9, at 10, they have smartphones, they have accounts, they should not be on any social media. So that is also the second thing, that you need to be able to verify that your users actually have the appropriate age to be on your social media. And in combination, well, we would have taken huge steps forward. And the third thing is that our Digital Services Act provides sort of a infrastructure of transparency. Today, a lot of things are taken down, but you don't know. With the Digital Services Act, there will be an infrastructure. You'll have an obligation to tell people, I have taken down your content, so that eventually you can complain about it if you find that your freedom of expression is being violated. So it's a push on the one hand side to keep people safe, while at the same time enabling people themselves to have agency when it comes to their freedom of expression, if they have the right age and if the services as such are safe to use. And I think those are really important milestones to be reached in order to make sure that social media services, they are as safe to use as a feeding bottle or the paint that you use for your walls, in order to make sure that they don't, use lead or endocrine disruptors in your feeding bottles. At the same time, we want our social services, social media services, to be as safe for kids to use. And that is our guiding principle.
I love that. No lead paint. No lead paint and no toxic substances online. Hillary, you have recently been focused or helping support online safety in New York with the New York Safe for Kids Act and the New York Digital Data Protection Act. And I know, just knowing you a little bit with your 3 grandchildren, that is top of mind also. Can you just talk a little bit about what those do?
Yeah. Well, let me start by thanking our guest from a foreign place for her leadership, and not just her leadership, but her advocacy for the importance of what Europe has done. And I think I'm right that it's the only real significant enforceable legislation on these issues anywhere in the world. Yep. In our country, both California and New York have passed legislation attempting to do what you have done. And I commend Governor Newsom, and I commend Governor Hochul, and I commend Common Sense Media, because Common Sense Media was really behind the push on both the California legislation and the New York legislation. What's in it is similar to what you've just heard. But the idea that any individual state in our country can enforce its own laws against the power of the social media platforms and the entire tech community is, a very problematic proposition. So I'm proud of what California and New York have done, because at least they filled the void in the absence of congressional action. And Emery, what I'd like to instead focus on just for a minute is what happened in the last Congress, because you can be enthusiastic about the states as laboratories for democracy, which I am, and we have to do much more of that. But we need a national policy, and we don't have it. So the Kids on Safety Act, the so-called COSA Act, which was a bipartisan act, passed the United States Senate by an overwhelming majority. As I recall, it was like, 95-3. It was huge. And it took a lot of legislative effort. It was, the 2 lead sponsors, as I recall, were Dick Blumenthal from Connecticut and Marsha Blackman from Tennessee. And they came together in a time when it's very difficult to find common ground, and passed what would have been our national legislation that would have been much more comparable and enforceable as the EU had done. So it got to the House in December. So it was in the lame duck session. And there were enough people in the House to vote for it. It would have passed. But instead, the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, would not let it come up for a vote. And many of us did what we could to lobby and advocate and try to influence his decision-making. And what was his 2-word response is basically concerns about free speech, which is a total dodge because, free speech is now being held up by people who only want speech that is favorable to them. And it is not a legal concept that they are deploying. It is a political dodge that they are relying on. And, basically, he, in my view, was stopped because of industry pressures. And then the fig leaf of free speech was the public explanation. I don't know whether there will be any opportunity to bring back national legislation in this next Congress. It's hard to see that we would get a vote in the House. I think would probably be able, once again to pass something in the Senate. But that just leads me to point out the difference that you see represented on the stage. You have a tough-minded regulator who convinced, and it's not easy to convince all the members of the European Union and members on the European Commission, and this is old-fashioned politics, but you are able to convince people to pass significant legislation, and the United States is lagging very, very far behind, and it, in my view, is getting more and more dangerous for kids to be online. We now have irrefutable evidence of all kinds of, mental health challenges and problems that are, certainly correlated with and even caused by excessive usage by young kids. And so I think, we can applaud our states, and we need to see more of that. And we've got a great model coming out of the EU, but we need national legislation, and it should be a huge issue that people support in the Congress and the administration.
Agreed.
If I may ask,
I was gonna invite you to respond, but also maybe to talk about whether. So if we can't do anything nationally, it's going to have to be building that coalition of states, a big, big coalition. But I want to hear your response, but also I ask whether you see any way of the EU and possibly other states putting external pressure, even more external pressure on the U.S. in the absence of a really strong, any strong way of pushing internally on Congress.
Well, so other than the things I mentioned already, also you cannot profile children. You cannot do targeted advertising at children in order to keep, some space before they're just a commercial object. And you cannot have the addictive designs that we see so much. So we have active investigations. As said, we have one that is finalized against TikTok. We have another TikTok investigation. We have a Facebook investigation. We have an Instagram investigation. And these are serious investigations because, as it was just said, we have very, very clear indications that these services are not safe to use. And the reason why we got this legislation, and we have central European enforcement, so it's not, national legislators or regulators who will have to do part of the job so that it gets to be piecemeal and maybe not that intense. It's a central European enforcement mechanism. The reason why it was successful was, of course, that people cared. Because there's massive lobbying in Brussels as well. Of course there is. But parents and youngsters and grandparents, they started to grow more and more and more concerned. And I think that is also one of the messages from the summit here. Everybody can do something to make sure that their community knows the risks and deals with the risk, but never ever accept that this is a decentralized issue that parents need to deal with themselves. This is a systematic issue. This is something in the structure that needs to change. And that change will only come if we say we want that change. And of course, I do hope that when people see what's happening to Europe, they say, well, kids are the same. Brains are kind of the same in their development. We want to have what the Europeans are having. Because why should our kids be exposed to addictive designs and dark patterns and risk to their mental health? And I think in that respect, we can help each other a lot by exchanging what is actually going on, what is really happening. And as said, we tried everything before we took the step to legislate.
So let me broaden that out, because I'm watching our time speed by. Hillary, when you and I worked together, when I had the honor of working for you, you gave the internet freedom speech at the museum, and you talked about, it was based on 4 freedoms and the right to connect, and it was Google had just pulled out of China, and it was still really a period of tech optimism. And in your State Department, we started running tech delegations to other countries. And I would say, Margrethe, you presided over maybe a less optimistic period, really over the techlash here in the U.S. and a real understanding of the harms. And right now, of course, we're more polarized than ever. I mean, in this part of the world, any regulation is often seen as simply anathema, and we've got a kind of what I would call a tech bro takedown of the regulatory state going on. The question, but at the same time, I mean, you look at education, you look at pretty much everything a lot of us care about, and technology has to be a piece. So my question, and Hillary, I'll turn to you first, can we imagine building that broader coalition for healthy, responsible technology that really is helping learning, helping addressing so many of the things we have not been able to do, and of course specifically with AI, but maybe, with parents, with grandparents, with the same strategy. Hillary, I saw you do with healthcare, right? When you didn't get national healthcare, you built children's healthcare. And I found out Margrethe was the Minister of Education in Denmark when she was 12. But so Hillary, let me start with you. I mean, you've had a lot of experience with this kind of strategy. Can we do something like that?
Well, I am a congenital optimist. It's a choice I make every day, despite what's going on. And so I think we have to believe we can. But I take the caution that Margrethe gave us, which is they tried everything, too. And they tried every way to try to stem the danger that was very apparent to kids' health and safety. So we have to try. But I don't want to mislead anybody about whether we can make it happen. The one element that I would like to see us really dig into, and I want to give Bill Reedy and Pinterest a big call out, because they have been working very hard to actually do some of what they would be required to do in Europe. Age verification, private accounts for, people under 16, the kinds of things that would make a lot of sense. And they are beginning to demonstrate there are good business reasons for doing that. So in addition to the kind of coalition approach that I believe in and think we have to do more to promote, we also need to figure out a business argument to make in order to get the ears to open and the doors to follow, so that we can try to convince the companies themselves that there are some, business opportunities in actually putting kids' health and safety at the forefront. But I have no illusions, especially in, as you said, Anne-Marie, the tech bro takedown of the regulatory state, as we know, is going on. But I think we should try, but we need to add the extra element with, business leaders like Pinterest and others that, hey, you know what? This can be good for business as well as good for society.
Great. Thank you. Margrethe, I think you get the last word.
Yeah, well, no, it's there's so much to say. But the thing is that since we're, entering into an age of artificial intelligence, this becomes absolutely crucial, because this is the next industrial revolution. And we're still dealing with the effects of the first one. Climate change, pollution, PFAS in our bodies, microplastic in our brains. All of that came from the first industrial revolution because we were not in control. And it's taken us 100 years to get to here, where we're somewhat in control. So we have a new industrial revolution happening. And if we do not want to make sure that you can trust technology to serve humans, the damages will be so much faster. And I'm an optimist as well. And that is because pessimists never get anything done. Because why would they? It's worse tomorrow. But I think a proper dose of realism is absolutely needed. Because the sad thing is that we cannot trust technology to serve people. I thought I was responsible for our strategy for our digital decade. And the first choice we made was to say, well, the most important thing here is that technology should serve people. And I thought, oh my God, that is trivial. But the thing is that if you're not careful, then we're just meat for the machines. And the children, they're the first ones to be eaten.
That is a profound note to end on, and a truly sobering one. I will just close by saying I absolutely agree. We have to be optimistic, and we know that pessimists may be more accurate, but optimists get more done. So we have to be optimists. I do also think focusing on the children, focusing on our future, we all, have relationships with young people in our lives. I do think that's a very powerful way to start. And I'm going to give Hillary the very last word, but not directly. Should you have looked at a story about Jeff Goldberg in The Atlantic, you might have looked at a tweet that said, "You've got to be kidding," from Secretary Clinton. Thank you very much.
Checks I still call it Twitter
Yes.
account.